Queen Matilda of Flanders, overshadowed by her more famous granddaughter of the same name, was atypical for a woman of her time. She had immense sway, refusing to be cowed by her often violent Norman husband. She was more than just the wife of the conqueror. She was one of the most influential and powerful women in Europe. And this is her story. Matilda's beloved son, Richard, is dead. Killed during a hunting accident as he raced through the New Forest in England. The lad was only in his mid-teens. Matilda is beside herself with grief. She is freeing some of her lands from taxation and she's donating relics to monasteries. Remember, she's also highly superstitious, and every sign, every prayer, and every coincidence would bear meaning at this point. Matilda is in her early 40s. She's had 9 children. A considerable feat in a day and age with epidurals and modern science, let alone the 11th century. And all the time, she's still a power to be reckoned with at court. Richard might have been the second child she's lost. But firstly, we do not know of any other complications in births, etc., that have not been recorded. We already know that so much simply was not written down or has been lost in time, because the fog of time is thick during the 11th century. Secondly, we don't really know for sure what happened to Adeliza. I mentioned her before. She's only a year younger than Richard. But again, we don't even know that for sure. And it's assumed she died on her way to get married in 1067, following the Battle of Hastings. But so much is murky and obscures any light our proverbial torches shine on the subject. That Adeliza is mentioned in the 1070s suggests she couldn't have died in 1067. And in 1074, she's supposed to be marrying Simon de Clepie. Again, not only does nothing seem to come of this because records are scant, piecing together anything in this period is a complete bugger. And as for Simon de Clepie, he ends up joining a monastery. He doesn't get married, and the same most certainly happened to Adeliza. But, like I said before, she simply fades into the murky depths of history, her fate unknown. Such is the lot of obscure figures who don't get to make such of an impact on the world. It's hard enough to piece together Matilda's life, let alone Richard or Adeliza. Hence I tend to work in stages, rather than a year-by-year walkthrough like I did with King John and Henry III. They have thousands upon thousands of documents, from charters to letters to critiques. If you were to write a book on Henry III, detailing every single piece written about him in his own time, you could fill the average library. Well, this is not the case with Matilda, because so much is unknown. She's quite a shadowy figure in comparison. Occasionally, we can pinpoint where Matilda is. Via records and events, we know that she was in England in the spring of 1072, no doubt a PR stunt to boost William's standing there. We know she's in Winchester celebrating Easter that year. In England, Matilda would undergo her usual visits around the country, and soon she's in Windsor. This was pretty much their routine as her life would go on. Her grand tours beginning in Winchester for Easter, and then either Westminster or Windsor for Whitsun. Got Christmas courts and everything else. It's keeping up appearances. It's showing her face. The royal couple needed to be strong, as the mice play when the cats are away. And without Matilda, William still is pretty much just seen as a usurper. So, despite losing Richard, Matilda remains undaunted. Looking at the records, it's like she never took a day off, most likely having suffered grief, burying herself in her duties. Certainly explains a lot, because Matilda was the epitome of fortitude. And fortitude is what was needed during these times, as quite a bit was going on. You had the uprising in Maine, where the Norman garrison was driven out, and that wasn't the only rebellion. Aside from situations in places like Anjou and France, you have the situation in Matilda's homeland of Flanders, where her brother, Robert the Frisian, claimed the land for himself, and William Fitz-Osbern, the favourite of the king, one of the greatest knights of the age, had headed to deal with that rebellion, but was slain at the Battle of Cassel. All isn't going great, and it would be a while before King William can arrive and knock some heads together. Until then, Normandy, once again, was surrounded by enemies. Thankfully, William the Conqueror was a seasoned veteran of many brutal and victorious campaigns. He was feared by better foes long before the conquest. He's beaten better leaders. He's crushed better armies. These are merely young scallywags who, if they didn't play their cards right, they would find their lives cut short. Another notch on a conqueror's sword, nothing less. For even the French king at this time is only 20. Matilda is also heavily involved in the church, for instance in the giving of alms, which she was known to do, plus the sorting out of squabbles between various bishops like Osborne and Guissot of Exeter and Wells. Also, helping her husband in sorting out the pecking order with the various cathedrals, because until now, England is far from a united kingdom. But all that's changing. Matilda is involved in getting the Archbishop of York, Thomas of Bayeux, to accept the Archbishop of Canterbury, Lanfranc, as his superior. Both men had been given their positions in 1070, as Eadred had died in York, and in Canterbury, Sthregund had been excommunicated and needed replacing. Not that Lanfranc wanted the job. He was happy running the Abbey of Saint-Étienne, with just a few monks. Now he had one of the most important jobs in the kingdom, as well as being tutor to the young Henry, Matilda's son. This new position would not be an easy job, and the Church of England certainly needed much reforming. The Act of Simony needed banning for a start, and Lanfranc was quite the reformer. Let's just say he was persuaded to take the position, and the Italian monk would hold that position for the rest of his life. No longer just managing several monks, but a whole entourage of staff and servants, much like the King and Queen. And actually, I think it would be a good idea to explain more about the structure and routine of castle life. Because the castle keep, where the nobility lived, were no neoclassical affairs with spacious rooms and endless corridors. This wasn't the Enlightenment period. See for yourself. They are quite cramped, and not enough room to swing the proverbial moggy. The rooms are often more smaller than our modern-day equivalent, and given a castle was primarily a military installation designed against siege warfare, the windows were also smaller, many a little more than an arrow slit. Even the stairs are narrower, as you can see, and these are the regular stairs, not the many spiral staircases that were a prominent feature of castles and manors, even abbeys.
A good old-fashioned spiral.
This was often the only way you could get from floor to floor.
And just imagine back in those days when you haven't got fully gripped shoes. Look at the length of the stairs. Don't get much out of it, do you?
You must have had some kind of rotor with a spiral staircase, calling up to see if someone's coming down. Because there's no way you're going to get 2 people at a time going up and down the stairs here. The buildings of all kinds were, well, cosy affairs, to say the least. Now add the staff. People were very used to being around other people. They didn't shut themselves away from others, and even a quiet walk in the woods would have had servants and an armed guard, especially for William and Matilda. Could you be on the ramparts and get some private time there? Yeah, with all the soldiers around, and you've still got your staff. It's a hostile land, and many consider William a usurper. They're guarded at all times. There is little privacy. Do take in mind that Matilda would be used to such high living. She was highborn, raised with servants all around her. She would not have known a day in her life without them. Even a short trip from her bedchamber to the garderobe would have been accompanied. And of course, there would be privacy in the private chapel, a good place to reflect and to be at peace. With an armed guard at the door, a couple of servants at hand, and a private priest. I often say that history is murky, but a famous document written a little bit later begins to shed a great deal of light here. The Domesday Book. Here we learn that Matilda's entourage was considerably large. Here we go. I've already mentioned a private chapel, so we know there's a priest, and she had her own private priest. There's also a butler, several cooks, led by a head chef called Albold. Yes, we know their names. Chef Albold was no mere serf. He's a landed gent with a manor in Hampshire. He's the equivalent of a celebrity chef like Gordon Ramsay. The best the 11th century had to offer. A man of culinary renown. Matilda had a chamberlain named Humphrey, a reeve named Jocelyn, all landed gentry. Because don't expect serfs here. Expect her staff to be from noble birth. It's all about prestige. You're a baron, and your daughter waits for the Queen? Your standing is raised significantly. Look at today's British royal family. The staff are from privileged backgrounds. Even the nannies come from the best private schools. They're often ladies in their own right. And I haven't finished with her entourage, Matilda's this is, because there's several stewards, tax collectors, hunters, and a whole bunch more. Matilda added to this with a whole host of male and female serfs, catering to her every need. When I said about the lack of privacy, now you know what I'm talking about. When William was away, her staff were fully equipped to run the kingdom, because he'd take his with him. But there was also a whole host of peasants elsewhere, running the farms, the menial jobs, the estate. Like I said, this was a huge household. And this is just her staff while in England, mentioned in the records like the Domesday Book. She probably hogged an entire chapter to herself. But her equally sizable Norman staff are unknown. Maybe the Normans should have their own Domesday Book. It is a very sociable day and age, and nothing's really changed. As in our modern times, the royal family are very much strangers to privacy, just as Matilda was in her reign. So when it comes down to Matilda's influence on politics, you can understand how everything is connected, as everyone is privy to everything. William isn't having a private chat with Fitz-Osbern in a secret room. For a start, what secret room? The king would most likely be at a feast, dealing in the open, a few wines deep. Or in a room with several magnates, staff and guards. This also meant that what William knows, Matilda knows, and what Matilda knows, she can influence. And we already know how much of a powerful stateswoman she was. She's not even trying to hide it. Thus, it is highly doubtful that she's keeping out of affairs. She's most likely at the centre of it all, right in the thick of it. The only times she's kept out of affairs is when Matilda is whisked out of the country in times of rebellion and turmoil. Like in mid-1072, when Malcolm, the King of Scotland, invaded the north. The Queen had to return back to Normandy, where she acted again as co-regent with her eldest son, Robert Curthose. Well, I say she's co-ruling. It's not like Robert is seeing much power. And it's not like Normandy is entirely peaceful, as you still have enemies at the door. France has always been hostile, as has Maine. And given that William backed up the wrong faction, even Flanders is now hostile. By the autumn of 1072, William had subdued Malcolm of Scotland, and all was well again. He's pretty much subdued the whole of the British Isles by this point, so his visits to Normandy become more and more frequent. He can now knock some heads together and restore stability, especially in Maine and Flanders. Once again, the conqueror heads to Maine with a sizable force. The rebels didn't stand a chance, and much like in the north of England, William harried Maine, burning town after town. They suffered exactly the same fate. He even destroyed the vineyards. And by 1073, the region is stabilised. During the 1070s, William is spending so much time in Normandy that he is pretty much ruling England from the continent from this period on, spending more and more time in his homeland. So Matilda decides to spice up their infrequent visits by making the courts as lavish as possible. Her husband has already granted her much land there, and she's using that land as generously as possible for her English subjects. She's bringing over artists from the continent to come to England, like painters, poets, artisans of all kinds, people who are encouraged to teach the native Saxons their ways. Matilda was in her element in England. She relished in it, and it's an age before Eleanor of Aquitaine and her courts of love. The Domesday Book gives us an insight into Matilda's other interests, for she devotes a lot of time to legal and justice matters. And remember, these would be English matters, not Norman matters. She's settling disputes, taxes, all kinds of matters. And rather than be daunted, she seems to relish in the task. Right, Simon de Crepy, the man who turned monk, the guy I mentioned earlier, he calls her the Queen of the English, Matilda, wealthy and powerful. She's loved by the English, especially given the corruption of Bishop Odo and the late William Fitz-Osbern. Both these men, and many other Normans, utterly despised the English. Matilda is the one mitigating all of this. Whenever Matilda headed back to Normandy, England saddened. Of course, it's not all a bed of roses, as she's still not as popular as the much-loved Edith of Wessex, the widow of Edward the Confessor, who is still regarded, Edith this is, by most Saxons as the figurehead of the people. And naysayers go further, and they call Matilda nothing but a bedwench. But progress is being made, and Rome wasn't built in a day. Matilda was more popular than ever. Matilda is also ramping up their crown-wearing events to new levels of lavishness, pretty much showing off the entirety of their majesty. Right, these crown-wearing events were pretty big affairs and were very much a Norman thing. William and Matilda have been doing these for a few years now, going back to at least 1069 at Winchester, showing they are indeed king and queen. Seeing these two bedecked in their crowns of state was a statement like no other. And we already know Matilda was responsible for putting all these events together, and no expense was spared. These were large, generous events, which included everyone of importance, plus hangers-on. Hundreds of people. An arrogant display of wealth and power. The splendour is even noted in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. The king and queen are not being shy about showing their riches. William and Matilda were a power couple famous for their courts. Even their regular courts were fabulous affairs, so imagine what these were like. Everyone important was there, and anyone wanting to be seen was only a horse away. Plus, Matilda could boast a high-born ancestry, furthering William's credibility as king, because without Matilda, William is merely a usurper in the eyes of the English. Lanfranc, the Bishop of Canterbury, tells us a story. He writes about a certain crown-wearing ceremony where Matilda is absent. Right. King William is bedecked in his finest. Beside him was Lanfranc. The court jester sees the king. He cries out, "Behold, I see God." This offends Lanfranc, who orders him whipped for blasphemy. The chutzpah. So William, who initially didn't see a problem with the joke, gives in to the archbishop, and the jester is flogged. No, he's not sold off. He's whipped. A jester being flogged would never have occurred under Matilda, but nor would the blasphemy. She simply commanded too much respect. Things were better when she was present, while William acted like an uncouth barbarian from the times of Bede, and seemed to encourage such behaviour. From a cynical point of view, William and Matilda seemed to work like the good old good cop, bad cop routine. You'd want to deal with the friendly, diplomatic, charming and charismatic Matilda, or suffer the wrath of the conqueror. She had a huge amount of influence over the royal court, but she wasn't without her haters and people out to smear her name. Usually enemies in lands like France, who accused her of all kinds of things, usually adultery. But for the most part, she was very much respected and spoke about fondly all across Europe. And as a whole, the perception of women in society was changing. Not just due to Matilda, but as a societal change, as the poets and troubadours that were writing all the romantic courtly literature were fond of these formidable women, like the righteous Emma of Normandy to the wicked Mabel of Bethune. The stories of powerful women who often had too much power over their husbands. Belles dames sans merci, beautiful ladies without mercy, the femme fatale. An odd blend of misogyny and wokery, if you look at it like that. It's like the writers didn't quite know what to make of it. Even the extremely wealthy Emma of Normandy wasn't immune to criticism, as she's depicted as squandering her riches on jewellery. The women couldn't win. You save the money, you're hoarding it. You spend it, you're a spendthrift. You play a passive role at court, you're not worthy of a mention, you're weak. You play an active role at court, you're domineering, you're a she-wolf. Was Mabel of Bethune really that wicked? How much of her evil doings were born out of the same misogynistic attitudes of the time? Was she really poisoning her enemies? Did she really traverse the kingdom with a brutal army of soldiers at her side? She could have just had an armed guard due to visiting a hostile land. She could also be blamed for other people's murders. We've already learned in previous videos how Matilda, who was loved, fell foul of negative literature. So imagine what it was like to someone people already hated. So we're not just dealing with the murky depths of history, we're also dealing with propaganda. In 1074, Matilda was regent again, due to William being in England. We see Matilda granting her own charters, independent of her husband. And William is there again in 1075, sorting out a rebellion between three earls. So given the fact that the king was absent for a year, for Matilda, this is considerable power. Oh, and those three earls are the chaps who are revolting? They are not Edwin and Morcar, not Edgar Atheling, not any Saxon earls. No, they are Normans. They are Roger de Breteuil, the second Earl of Hereford, son of the legendary William Fitzosborne. You got Waltheof, the Earl of Northumbria, and Ralph de Gale, Earl of East Anglia. Okay, Waltheof is an Anglo-Saxon, the last Anglo-Saxon Earl, but details. Basically, these three scallywags are fighting over a marriage of Fitzosborne's daughter because de Gale wanted to marry Adeliza. The king said, "Buck this chance." No. So they married in secret. Hence the squabble. Hence William is now in England knocking some heads together. Anyway, back to Matilda. In the past, even as recent as 1072, Matilda would be co-regent with her son Robert, who's now in his 20s. He's a duke in all but name, but there are definitely changes happening, as the deterioration between father and son is evident, and the breakdown of their relationship. Robert Curthose would never be made heir apparent, and would never inherit the throne of England. That would pass to his younger brother, William Rufus. Even the young boy Henry was more popular. So Robert is no longer trusted with running as co-regent during the mid-70s. It's solely Matilda. But he isn't the only one being overlooked, as others, people like William Fitzosborne, Roger Montgomery and Bishop Odo, have also been overlooked. Traditionally, they've always played second fiddle to Matilda. even going back to the conquest of 1066, which was almost a decade ago. Now, given that Bishop Odo was also known as the Second King because of his considerable power, it says a lot about the Queen and her relation with King William. They really were the power couple, in every meaning of the term. In December 1075, the widow Edith of Wessex passed away at only around 50 years of age, and instead of contempt, King William gave her an honourable burial fit for a queen. Entombed at Westminster next to her royal husband, Edward the Confessor, the saintly king, because he'll later be canonised by the Pope in the 12th century, the only king of England to receive that honour. Edward the Confessor could be argued as overtaking St Edmund as the patron saint of England. Take in mind that St George wasn't the patron saint of England at this period. Not yet. Currently it is St Edmund, the boy king slain by the great heathen army. Pretty much gets shot to death by arrows. He's one of the English kings who was venerated as a saint locally, and without the thumbs up from the Pope. Right. Respecting the previous king and queen was a great move politically from William and Matilda, and do remember that neither William nor Matilda regarded Harold Godwinson as king. As far as they were concerned, he was the usurper. The Confessor was the king directly before William. So, Edward and Edith were very much respected. Now they rested next to each other in Westminster, London, the abbey founded by the future saint himself. This was also no doubt part of an ongoing plan to elevate King William's standing with the papacy, a plan that was clearly the brainchild of Matilda, who is only a letter away from the Pope, who is Gregory VII at this point, and he's even congratulating her on getting the unruly William to rein in his love of excess. Pope Gregory seems to adore Matilda, as, going by a letter he sends to her, he even calls her beloved daughter. The Queen and the Pope would write to each other quite frequently over the years, because her devotion to her husband was second only to her devotion to God and the Church, something that the Pope deeply respected, and her efforts to reform that scallywag of a husband, because there was still plenty of work to be done. Like when he sacked the cathedral at Le Mans in 1073. Things like this had to be amended. And amended they were, because they became relieved of all duties and customs to help ease things up. But still, the conqueror was on the right track, as far as Pope Gregory and the Church was concerned. All was good. Everything is going so well. Matilda has been queen for almost 10 years. The conquest is a lifetime away. She's in her mid-40s. She's seen tragedy. She's seen revolt. She's seen her own family in Flanders fall to rebellion and war. But nothing could prepare her for what happened next, as the relationship between her eldest son and her husband had utterly collapsed. Robert Curthose is about to tear the family apart.